Ladies and gentlemen, the Las Vegas Raiders finally had their introductory press conference for their new head coach Antonio Pierce and new general manager Tom Telesco. But what was really critical is something that Antonio Pierce said during the presser, comments by Telesco during the presser, old jabs at former head coaches, and also a couple comments that might indicate who's really running things in Las Vegas. So we have this here new regime, a cute little picture, Mark Davis, Tom Telesco, and Antonio Pierce all posing for the camera on this big introductory day. What was weird to me though is unlike previous introductory press conferences where Mark Davis is usually there the whole time answering questions, we know famously he answered questions in Josh McDaniels' old press conference and said that they're just getting to the next level and trying to make a Super Bowl.
Now we're just moving to the next level. And that, it's not a rebuild, it's not a reload, it's just taking this to the next level and getting to that Super Bowl and winning some championships.
Obviously, that did not happen. But this time, after introducing Antonio Pierce and Tom Telesco, Mark Davis stepped away, didn't even sit there as they gave their introductory remarks. Maybe this shows what Mark Davis wants to do a little more in the future, be more in the background rather than having to be a spokesperson all the time for the football team. One person who is in attendance, and this is very critical for Raiders fans everywhere, is defensive coordinator Patrick Graham. We know Graham has gotten opportunities interviewing for a head coaching position. He interviewed with the Seattle Seahawks 2 times, and he also interviewed with the Chargers. Now the Chargers have since hired Jim Harbaugh, so obviously Patrick Graham does not have many opportunities to become a head coach because he's still under contract with the Raiders as a defensive coordinator. They could block him from interviewing for any defensive coordinator jobs, and he's pretty much a lock at this point to stay with the Raiders at defensive coordinator, unless of course out of nowhere the Seahawks hire him as head coach. That would be the only way that he could leave. What made this a little more awkward in my opinion was Antonio Pierce in his introductory press conference before he said anything. And this is your intro press conference that's going to be there for life. And so it was kind of funny to see him make this candid remark. He pointed out Patrick Graham in his first words in his introductory press conference. I mean, take a look. Take a look at this.
At least I am. We got a great house here. Patrick Graham, good to see you, man.
Patrick Graham, good to see you. But maybe this just goes to show how important Patrick Graham is. I mean, he had that defense working hot towards the end of the 2023 season. And maybe Antonio Pierce is glad to see him there, glad to see he's still going to be part of the squad because the Raiders are going to need this guy. But what was even more hilarious was Antonio Pierce, even though it's mainly reporters in the crowd who are not necessarily fans of the Raiders, well, Antonio Pierce all forced them all to do a big time Raiders chant.
And all our victories a certain way in the locker room. So we got a packed house here. We're going to see how everybody's vocal cords work. So stay with me. You ready? Raiders! Yeah, now we warmed up. See, that's what we're talking about.
Now I know if we're being real, you can feel how awkward it was in the room. Perhaps he would have got better reception if he was in Allegiant Stadium, but this seems like Pierce's strategy in terms of how he's going to brand himself and market himself to the Raiders fan base. He's marketing himself as someone who's relatable to the fans, who's just another Raiders fan, grew up in Los Angeles, has been a Raiders fan, and we'll see how much this works for him. If he wins games and continues to win games, people are not going to mind the Raiders chant at the press conference. But if you start losing games, this is going to get old real quick. And you got other people saying this in the replies here. This act will wear thin soon. Bookmark this. Look, I hope the guy does well. It's going to be tough in the AFC West going up against Andy Reid, Sean Payton, and now Jim Harbaugh. But it is going to be interesting to see how he's going to navigate this and if he's still going to do this chance if the Raiders hit some speed bumps in the regular season. Richard Seymour, former Raiders player, has been talking a lot on social media lately because he has a big-time role with the Raiders organization now. He actually sat in on all the interviews for GMs and head coaches around this hiring cycle, and many believe he's that key consultant that Mark Davis has been talking about, a football mind to be a part of the organization to help guide things outside of a head coach at a GM. And you got Seymour standing there next to Pierce and Tom Telesco. Raiders fans need to get to know this guy because it seems like he's going to be feeding Mark Davis a lot of information. With Patrick Graham staying as defensive coordinator, now the Raiders need to find their offensive coordinator. They're interviewing right now Mike Sullivan, Steelers quarterback coach who took over as play caller after Matt Canada was fired for the Pittsburgh Steelers just this past season. But But the sexier coordinator that the Raiders are set to interview is Cliff Kingsbury. The former head coach of the Arizona Cardinals was a big-time head coach in college at Texas Tech, and more recently, he was an offensive assistant for the USC Trojans with Caleb Williams at quarterback. Cliff Kingsbury is known for the air raid offense, an offense where you spread out the defense with multiple wide receivers and also rely on your quarterback to improvise and find holes and running lanes if the play breaks down. So this is very intriguing for Raiders fans. Will they go for a mobile quarterback? If you grab somebody like Cliff Kingsbury, it does make a lot of sense. Pierce himself was asked what he's looking for in an offensive coordinator, and he could not help himself. He could not help but take some jabs at Josh McDaniels in this moment.
Minimum 24 points.
Josh McDaniels struggled to score 24 points in a game for a long time as part of the 2023 season. So it was cool to see Antonio Pierce have the confidence to take some shots at the former head coach, the guy he ended up replacing. But one key thing that Pierce said I thought was very interesting.
We know that we have some positions on our roster that we need to look at and evaluate even more. Tom and myself as we go forward.
So when asked about the offensive coordinator, he makes a comment about the roster and says there's specific positions that him and Tom Telesco, the general manager, will need to look at and see what they're going to do. And if you're talking about the offensive side of the football and you are a Raiders fan who know the Raiders team, not many problems on the offensive side of the football, especially if Josh Jacobs comes back, other than right guard, maybe, and quarterback. I mean, quarterback is the big problem on the offensive side of the football. You're not going to say that wide receivers are the issue when you got Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, Trey Tucker, who's emerging, and also Hunter Renfrow. You can't say wide receiver is the problem. Quarterback Aiden O'Connell, who took over as starter under Antonio Pierce after Josh McDaniels was fired, well, he was asked by 8 News Now Logan Reaver what he thinks about Pierce and the Raiders perhaps bringing in another quarterback to compete.
And I also think it would be right to have competition in this league. It's the NFL. It's the best of the best, and so it's my job to try to keep my job, and it's people around me decision to try to get the best person possible for that job.
One notable thing for me was when Tom Telesco was asked about Antonio Pierce, and I think this is very critical because keep in mind, Telesco technically did not hire Antonio Pierce. He's going to say some comments here where he says some nice things about Pierce and how he partly took the job to collaborate with him. But there's one specific thing that he says that I think is really important, which is the fact that he did not hire Pierce and he looked at him as the coach who was already hired when he got there.
When I interviewed for this job, I didn't see it as like it was that the head coach's job was open. I'm like, he's the head coach. You know, AP came in, in short notice and produced on the field. Didn't do anything to not have the job. So he had the job at the end of the year. He was the head coach when I came in and interviewed. That's the way I kind of looked at it. Just the way he galvanized the team, he galvanized the building.
He's complimenting Antonio Pierce, and you could take this at face value like this. But the key thing he said is he was the head coach when I got here, and that is how I looked at it. We know in terms of the power structure of the Raiders, Mark Davis has already said to ESPN's Paul Gutierrez that Tom Telesco will have final say on the 53-man roster. They can work together. Obviously, the coach and GM always slightly works together. But like I've been saying on my main channel, Wi-Fi Willie, where I do more high-quality videos, Tom Telesco is running the show. We are finally back to the era where the Raiders GM makes the majority of the decisions and the head coach does not have equal power. So Tom Telesco seems like a nice guy and everything, and it seems like he's complimenting Antonio Pierce now. But if things go south, it looks like he will have the power to quite possibly make a change at head coach. And personally, this is just my opinion. I could be completely wrong, but I think it makes sense. Seems like part of the reason why Mark Davis hired Antonio Pierce before the GM, before Tom Telesco, when he said previously he wanted to hire the GM first, seems like part of the reason Davis did that is so Telesco can already have the excuse, just in case he needs it. He might not need it. He can already have the excuse and say, well, this head coach was a head coach that I inherited, Antonio Pierce. I did not necessarily choose this head coach. Therefore, we need to find a new one that's a guy more to my liking. Now, I'm not saying this is going to happen. Everything could work out. I'm mainly bringing this up just to say that Antonio Pierce does have a lot of pressure on him for this season. Now that they hired a GM from outside the organization like Tom Telesco, now that the Raiders decided not to hire interim GM Champ Kelly, who appointed Antonio Pierce to head coach, this has put more pressure on the guy to really have some great results for the 2024 season. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Will the Raiders with Antonio Pierce and Tom Telesco be able to shock the NFL world in the AFC West with all these tough head coaches like Harbaugh, Reed, and Sean Payton? I want to hear from you, and make sure you subscribe to this channel for more quick news news updates, Wi-Fi Willy daily. This is a little different than my main channel where we do more high quality content. Peace out, and I hope you have a good one.